We're all having fun with the trade machine, Yossi. Got to be honest with you. But I'm worried that you might rain on the parade a little bit here. Yossi Gozlan is here, who is a legitimate salary cap expert. If you follow his work, you know this. You've seen him on YouTube, also Hoops Hype in the past. Currently, just building out a YouTube channel and a whole bunch of other things. Substack. I think capsheets.com is where you can get salary cap information. And
I'm
Yossi,
all over the place.
yeah, yeah. Listen, in this game, I talked about this. In this game, you have to be as somebody who's had multiple jobs for a decade strong at this point. You kind of have to be all over the place. Yossi, how we feeling, man? How you doing these days? Not that the trade
I'm
deadline's
doing
coming
well. I'm
up.
excited. Uh, we'll see how much fireworks actually happens, but I'm still pretty excited this time of year. How about you?
Doing all right. Look, I'm having a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun, but at the same time, I hope it's a busy time in the trade deadline world. We have 9 days. We had Jimmy Butler get suspended again yesterday. We're going to talk about him again, as we've done on every live, literally for over a month on this program. Yossi, let's start here. The main thing I think I want to get into with you, who really understands the cap better than myself and probably most of the people watching this and who will watch this later on, just what are the biggest hurdles in terms of making deals that maybe the common NBA consumer who doesn't really have time to get into the weeds of all this, like what are the hurdles that they probably don't understand or are overlooking?
The most obvious ones are the rules, the new rules, especially for teams that already have pretty high payrolls, all the apron rules. And what makes it even more confusing is how you've got two different levels. So you can do certain things if you're over the first apron, and then you could do certain things if you're over the second. So that's number one. But then the other thing I think even more concerning is just not so much the rules, because a lot of people want to blame the rules on what makes the trade so complicated. Just the fact that there are so many expensive teams that are subjected to these rules. And then even with the teams that are, not in there, there's still other teams that are like pretty expensive, pretty close to the tax. So they have their own limitations as well. So there's like very few teams that actually have the flexibility to take on a lot of payroll and actually use some of the looser new trade rules that let non-expensive teams easily increase their payroll. So I think the biggest change is that there's going to be more multi-team trades. I don't think these everything that's changed necessarily is going to stop certain deals from getting done. If there's a deal to be made, I think it'll get done. I just think now you're going to have to make these trades bigger, because if you got two apron teams trying to make a deal together, chances are they can't just do a two-team trade because both teams can't increase their payroll. Okay, so you're gonna have to get a third team involved. So I think you're just adding, for the most part, extra steps for these trades to eventually get done.
But overall, okay, so basically since 2017, I believe, every year we've had a double digit amount of trades at the deadline, just at the deadline. So this isn't including, for example, a couple years ago when a couple days before the deadline, Kyrie Irving goes to Dallas out of nowhere. It's not including that. The day of, there's always a lot of activity. We've seen 10 teams, or we've seen actually 19 teams involved in 10 deals or whatever the case may be. And more than that, even like there have been years where 20 or more teams, which is two-thirds of the league, have been involved, even more than that. So you don't think that this is going to prevent that? This is just going to make teams, I guess, like Washington, Brooklyn, Detroit, Charlotte, just facilitators, and they're going to have to just get involved and be like, hey, can we get some draft pick compensation for our troubles, as opposed to these 1v1 deals where, for example, Phoenix and Miami, which is probably the big one, Miami doesn't want to take back Bradley Beal, but even if they wanted to, it probably wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world for Phoenix. Like they would still have to move around, so to speak. So can you just outline what some of these kind of deals could look like for some of these players?
So on a basic level, let's say it's just Jimmy Butler trade to Phoenix. If you can get a team like Detroit to help, where maybe they take on Beal and the Heat just take on expiring contracts and some of those draft picks from the Suns, and the Suns get Jimmy Butler, that helps both the Heat and the Suns to get this done because they neither team can increase their payroll right now. Both teams are going to want to reduce payroll, so the Pistons have a bunch of cap space. But it's probably going to take even more teams. If you can get like a second team with that much with more flexibility, that'll help too. Because for two teams like the Suns and the Heat that need a decreased payroll, it might take a couple extra teams to help allow them both to reduce the amount of payroll they're gonna need to make this deal work.
Do you ultimately think that the CBA is going to scare off some teams potentially? Like, there are going to be teams that want to not get into that second apron, potentially get away from even the first apron or whatever. Like, are we going to see moves like that where they're just basically clearing out the books, financial stuff where it looks boring on the surface, but it scoots a team away from the luxury, or not the luxury tax, but the second apron, so that they can be able to do things to maintain their flexibility down the line?
I guess we'll see. We're still pretty new to this, and we already kind of have seen that a little bit. Like when the Wolves traded Towns, that's them deciding a year in advance. Hey, let's get off the salary now because we're gonna have these restrictions later. They didn't really save any money for this season with that trade. So that might be like one of the bigger examples, and then we'll see like if, for example, the Celtics they decide to do something. So far, the Suns have been the only team that haven't run away from it.
Well, their owner is playing a dangerous game. I mean, and they have new owner syndrome, as Bill Simmons will call it in Phoenix. How fearful do you think, understanding the salary cap, how fearful do you think teams should actually be of the second apron?
I don't think they're as fearful as I expected them to be. You're gonna have a couple teams this year finish over it, but again, we're still too early because this is the first year where the rules are getting into effect, and so you're gonna have teams like the Wolves, Celtics, a couple others. They're gonna have their draft pick 7 years in the future frozen,
Hmm.
which isn't such a big deal because if they stay below the second apron in like the next 3 years, then that it gets unfrozen. But then the other big penalty that happens is that if they stay over the second apron again in like one of the following 3 years, then that same pick drops to the end of the first round. So that one is going to be a lot more. That's probably the one that we still have yet to see just how fearful teams will be because we're not there yet. But as far as staying over the second apron just to get the pick frozen, I feel like some teams aren't. They're not as fearful, especially like if you're a team like the Wolves, for example.
Hmm.
They already traded their 2031 first round pick to get Rob Dillingham. So technically, they can't trade their 2032 pick anyways. So that one's going to get frozen. So for them, it's probably not a big deal because they wouldn't be able to trade it anyways. But now they're. But if they stay over the second apron again, they run the risk of having it drop. So I think they're trying to prevent that. I don't think they want to have it just go to the end of the first round. And next year they'll have a pretty balanced cap sheet after trading Towns.
Is there something that, as people are having fun with the trade machine and moving this player for this player, and hey, I just sent Jimmy Butler here, or I just sent Zach LaVine here, in all the excitement for that, is there something that people are overlooking? Maybe it's a rule, a stipulation that the trade machines haven't factored in when making these deals.
Um, I don't know because I don't really use trade machines. I'll just use Fanspo just because how visually it looks. But for the most part, I just do everything through my Excel. So, and the reason I do that, I guess this would answer your question, is
Yeah.
because then I can tell if a team, let's say they are subjected to aprons or they're ideally trying to avoid the tax. I can know for sure. I don't know if the trade machines tell you for sure if the teams are achieving those goals. And then the other thing would be that some players, and this is more like on the technical side, but some players have trade bonuses. I don't know if the trade machines tell you that because trade bonuses change every day if a player has one. And I have that information. I can know exactly if a certain player was traded today, how that would change your salary. A couple other, and then there's like even more technical than that. Some players have bonuses that might change what their salary is presently uh, based on the team they go to. So there's small stuff like that, which are pretty rare, but
Hmm.
for the most part, I feel like some of these trade machines do enough to help. It's really hard to have them be perfect, but I think it seems like they do enough to help get these trades to work.
All right, I want to get back to a couple specific players. Let's hit Jimmy Butler again, but let's like actually get into it more this time. If he were to get traded to Phoenix, what is sort of the cleanest way that could look? Because Miami's in a position where they don't want to take back salary beyond 2026. Okay. And Bradley Beal ultimately has the power, doesn't want to waive his no trade clause. We'll ultimately see if they get him to cave. But Miami doesn't want him because that's obviously heavy salary beyond the due date, so to speak. So what would a trade like what's the cleanest way it can go down in your estimation? Just looking at the cap, looking at the books, and just sort of figuring out the moving parts of it all, and how many teams would it take?
Probably at least 5 teams,
At least
and
five.
yeah, and Pistons probably need to get involved because they have cap space, and then beyond that, they have a lot of flexibility. They could increase their payroll easily, even once they get capped out. But I
Jesus.
think just the biggest thing is where does Bradley Beal want to what is okay with him?
Hmm.
Because yesterday in the morning, Brian Windhorst was reporting how the Bulls and Suns were talking, and then later it was reported that no, he won't go to the Bulls. So seem and all the Suns insiders they're all like unanimously like, yeah, I don't think Jimmy Butler's coming here. So we'll see. I saw Windhorst said something last night about how now the Heat are willing to trade him on a discount, which I don't know what that means, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think if ultimately the Pistons do get involved, and if you're saying it's at least five teams, so we have Phoenix, we have Miami, we have Detroit. What do the other two teams look like? Are there teams that we've heard about already, rumored to want to get involved, like a Milwaukee, a Chicago? Like what? How do we piece this together?
Like if Beal was okay to going to Chicago, then you can also send Levine to the Bucks. That's been a pretty popular framework. Jimmy to the Suns, and then the Pistons take on money. The Heat get some decent players like Middleton, Portis. Maybe they get under the tax, and then just would the Suns send those 3 picks out? I was thinking maybe the Bucks do the same type of trade that the Suns did with the Jazz, maybe with the Nets, trade their 2031, get 3 firsts back, and then that makes it easier for them to get a Levine type. But
Hmm.
if the Suns aren't like if there's no way the Suns can get a deal done, then we're gonna have to just go back to the drawing board. That's what it seems like. It seems like after a week of momentum, because they did that trade with the Jazz, now it seems like maybe that's not the case anymore. Maybe there's going to be some surprise trade we didn't see coming.
Is there potentially okay? So if this is five teams in order to get Jimmy Butler to Phoenix, what do we think it looks like if he says, "Okay, fine, I'll consider Milwaukee," and then there's a route to? I don't think Miami Milwaukee would be a 1v1 either. I think at least another team gets involved. But the framework of that would be what? Because I was thinking maybe it's Middleton, Portis, something like that, heading to Miami. Jimmy Butler goes to Milwaukee, but then there has to be some other sort of fillers in between, be it a Detroit, maybe a Charlotte, Washington, something along those lines. Could you outline what that alternative could potentially look like?
So if it's just the Bucks, it would just need to be for on their end. They need to do a 4-for-1. They would need to send
Mm,
out Middleton, Portis, Connaughton, and then a guy like Marjan Beauchamp because that lets them satisfy the trade rules. Also, and then also lets them stay below the second apron. Right now they're above the second, but since they'd be aggregating salaries, they just got to be able to stay below the second apron because that would hard cap them to the second apron. So doing that does it. So they're able to get Butler, stay under the second apron, and also fill out their 14th roster spot while staying below the second apron. So that's for the Bucks. That's It's it's pretty simple. For the Heat and I think you can just get the Pistons involved if you can just have them take some combination of um, some guys from the Heat and maybe Connaughton that could work. Maybe a fourth team has to get involved, but without Beal's inclusion, it could be a little smaller, maybe three or four teams tops.
Let's do Zach Levine because his contract is a monster. Brought this up last week. Zach Levine would be, to me, would have been, I guess, one of the worst contracts in the NBA, and some could argue still might. But I mean, now he's playing at a higher level and has been healthy this year, which is the big change. 43 million this year, 46 next year, and a player option the last year for 49 million. Trading him doesn't seem as difficult as trading Jimmy Butler, except for the fact that he has more years. What would a Zach Levine deal look like? And this one you could probably have more free range with because it looks like Jimmy Butler has sort of narrowed down where he may end up, whereas Zach Levine, we don't even know if he gets traded, but if he does, what does that look like?
Well, I think it would probably be kind of the same thing because his salary is pretty similar to Jimmy's. So if it's a team like the Bucks again, for example, they've been linked to him recently. They got to do the same type of trade for the most part. So I think again, you're because of his salary, it's like almost at the max. You're probably looking at something like a three or four team trade to satisfy everyone. A lot of big money moving.
Do you think it'll be Middleton, Portis? Does it have to be Middleton, Portis, Connaughton, and Beauchamp, or does because they are six? Jimmy and Zach Levine are 6 million apart. Do you actually have to like include all of that for, I guess, the reasons of like just shedding a little bit more salary? Would that even be possible for the Bulls to take back?
So the difference though is that Levine, even though he's at 43, he's got a trade bonus that would bump him up to like almost Jimmy's number.
Mm.
So now if you're the Bucks, you still need to send out the same parts. Unless he declines it, then okay, maybe you can keep Connaughton, I'm not sure, but maybe you can just get away with, you know, three of those four. So yeah, that's the other element of, with Levine trades is that he's got a pretty big trade bonus, and he obviously doesn't have to keep it all. But for all for the most part, I'm just considering him taking that trade bonus and then makes him just as expensive as Jimmy.
And why would he waive his trade bonus? Because it's a bonus. In this country, you get every
Just to
dollar
help
you
him out.
can.
You
Yeah,
know?
yeah. In this country, you get every dollar you can, as we learn every day. Um, what would let's hit Zach Levine from the standpoint of okay, maybe he doesn't get moved, but other guys do. So maybe the Bulls still get involved in some way. Nikola Vucevic, for example, is a name that's been thrown out there. Alonzo Ball is a name that's been thrown out there. Like, is there motivation from the Bulls as a whole, you think, or should there be motivation just looking at the cap sheet for them to actually do some stuff to shed money? Like, should they do something or could they continue to operate as is and not be endangered, let's say?
Yes and no. I think even though they've been playing they've been overachieving a little bit this season. Now they're finally slumping. They did get a nice win last night, but I think they were like 2-9 in their last 11, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can, if you're the Bulls, you can say, well, now there's no pressure because we're probably still in a position to keep our pick anyways. It's top 10 protected. But also, Zach Levine's having arguably his best year. Last time I checked, he was shooting like 45% from three. Vucevic having his best year as a Bull, maybe his best year since his last Magic year. You might not get better value for them than now if you wait until next year. At the same time, I'm also kind of skeptical how much they can actually get because even when as good as Levine is, that's still I feel, in my opinion, slightly negative value contract. So I still struggle to find the teams that are gonna go for him right now, other than like the Bucks. Really, maybe the Pistons. I don't even think they would do it. And then Vucevic, as good as he's been, the reports the Bulls want a first round pick for him, and I just don't see which team wants to give that up to get him. Like the Warriors, for example, they seem like the most likely team based on all the reports they want him. And I don't see them trading their pick this year. It could be a lottery pick. I don't. And then why would you trade a distant first round pick for him? For a guy who, is I think he's in his early 30s. I just don't see the Bulls getting that type of value. So if they trade him, I think they're going to have to compromise a little bit in terms of what they're asking for with most of these guys.
You mentioned the Warriors. There's two teams out west I want to touch. The Warriors first. They're in a position where it feels like they should be trying to get a second star. We'll see if they actually pull it off. Doesn't look like Jimmy Butler is going to happen, although I thought that would have been interesting if they were in that race. I don't think they want to extend Jimmy Butler for obvious reasons because their cap sheet is a mess. And it doesn't appear that he wants to go there for that reason. But the Warriors, like, what is their level of flexibility given where they are financially? And also, they have this Jonathan Kuminga cloud sort of hanging above them because he's extension eligible. They're likely going to lose him, I'll say. I'm not going to say definitively, but they're likely going to lose him if he just happens to make it to free agency. So you would have to be wanting to extend him if you do trade for him. And I've said in the past, like, he'd probably be one of the best players that some other team could get from this trade deadline. He's injured right now, but can you describe or outline sort of the situation that the Warriors are in and what them adding a potential second star could look like?
So I don't think they'll add anyone big this trade deadline, but when I look at who they have to trade, they can get a deal done next offseason. They could have put together a package this last offseason to get a guy like Lauri Markkanen, but he was making only like, I don't know, 18 million. But at the same time, they were in the mix for Paul George. He would have gotten a max contract. They could have done something based around Wiggins and a couple other guys to make a deal done. So if the Warriors do want to make a trade for uh, an expensive player like that, like let's say Lauri Markkanen again, they're gonna need to have enough salaries to get within his 40 something million salary. So I part of what I think they might be trying to do right now is just position themselves to have enough money to do that, while also leaving enough space to potentially re-sign Jonathan Kuminga. I don't think they care so much about being in the tax, or just maybe they want to avoid the second apron. So it's possible to accomplish both of those things. Um, they can do if they want to do a Vucevic trade, they can definitely get it done. I think the question is, are they going to give up some contracts into next season? Like if they do like a Kyle Anderson, Buddy Hield type package to get Vucevic, then you're probably looking at trading him maybe alongside a Wiggins or Draymond Green to get it done, to get a max player next summer if that's on the table. Or maybe they just trade some of their expiring salaries this year, like Looney, Gary Payton, and then to have like just as much optionality as possible to do something. So they have, I think that's all they're trying to. They'd want to just kind of plan, just make sure you have the salaries to put yourself in a position to make that type of swing. And they have all their picks except for in 2030. So I think they could do something if a player's available. But then there's also just a separate question if it's even worth it. Is there a guy out there that's really gonna raise them to being a contender? I'm skeptical about that. So
Same.
especially with the types of players that might be available. So I guess we'll have to see who actually becomes available.
Yeah, like I thought the Jimmy Butler possibility, or not real possibility, but I guess a rumor, if we want to call it that, would have been interesting just from the standpoint of Jimmy, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, personality wise. Like I actually think that could be a lot of fun to watch. But even trying to make that happen, like it was like Wiggins, Kuminga, you're still very short of Jimmy's number. You have to throw in Kyle Anderson. You have to throw in, at the time, it was DeAnthony Melton. It became Dennis Schroeder. I don't think they're going to reroute Dennis Schroeder that quickly, although I believe he's trade eligible again the day before the deadline. So they could figure something out there, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Let me ask you about the Lakers, because they're, I would say, suspiciously quiet at the trade, well, in trade rumors right now. I don't think they're going to absolutely do nothing, but it looks like, and they've already gotten Dorian Finney-Smith in fairness, but it looks like they're in line to like they have some salaries to play with. They don't have anything to get like Jimmy Butler, for example, if he even wanted to go there, which he might, I don't know. But they have like Rui Hachimura at 17 million, 18.2 next year. They just traded for Dorian Finney-Smith. He's at about 15. Austin Reeves, who I don't think they're going to trade, is at 12.9. And that's part of the complications here because he has a beautiful salary, but like you want to keep him at that number. You don't want to just include him in a deal. Gabe Vincent's at 11, then 11.5. Jared Vanderbilt is at 10.7 and 11.5, and then 12.4, and then a player option for 13.2. So you have Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent, and Rui Hachimura is really like those are the contracts you would probably want to move if you're the Lakers, but that only brings you to about 38-ish million, which can get you something, and they don't have a lot of draft capital to play with. But like what would a Lakers deal outline if you are using Rui, Gabe, Vanderbilt, some sort of draft compensation? Like what is that even getting you in return if you're the Lakers, and is it worth it?
I think right now the Lakers probably just looking at doing something small, like another 1-for-1, 2-for-2 type trade
Mm-hmm.
that just involves one of the guys they could afford to move, like a Gabe Vincent, Jalen Hood-Schifino, some of their minimum guys. They could combine those guys right now to get someone else. They just need to stay below the second apron if they're going to combine players, which they're fine right now. They have enough space below it. Um, they, I think right now so I think they're gonna do something more marginal. Maybe they try to trade Gabe Vincent or maybe like pair him with some of these smaller salary guys I mentioned, like Shafino or some of the minimum guys, to get a big man or a guard who could defend. I think that's all they're really looking at right now. So most likely they're gonna it'll just be something that has them decrease their payroll. I wouldn't trade Rui. I think they need as much wing optionality as possible. Like now they're finally starting to kind of make ground on the damage they did from the Westbrook trade. They gave away so many wings, Pope and Kuzma. They
Yeah.
traded Danny Green the year before. Like that's a huge reason they won in 2020. And I see Rui in trade rumors now, especially to bring in another big man, which I understand Anthony Davis saying he doesn't want to
I was gonna
play
say
center,
you
but
could blame his
it's
teammate for that.
working. Uh, but if they're going to bring in a big man, they should. I wouldn't mess with the wings. Just see what you can get for some of those, uh, salaries that I mentioned. I wouldn't try to trade a first, but at the same time, they don't have any. They only have 2 second-round picks for this upcoming season, and those are going to be in like the late 40s most likely. So I don't even know how much you're going to get for that. Maybe, and so something I'm kind of keeping an eye on. Maybe they can do something with pick swaps because I remember last year. So the Mavs last trade deadline, they traded a first for PJ Washington, a
Mm-hmm.
pick swap that eventually helped them get Daniel Gafford, helped them get to the finals. I feel like the Lakers are kind of looking at that blueprint, just trying to do like a couple small trades to try to reinforce their depth and get what they need. So maybe after getting Dorian Finney-Smith, what if they can get a big man or that guard for like a pick swap? They can trade so that way they keep their first, but maybe they trade a pick swap in like one of the even number years, like 28 or 2030 or
Mm-hmm.
2026, because then that still lets them trade their odd number years, which gives them the most amount of picks to trade. So there's a bunch of different ways for the Lakers to look at it, but also what are you getting and what no matter what they trade, unless it's those seconds, if they're trading a first or a pick swap, there's a lot of value in those. So who are you getting that makes it worth trading something like that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I question if it's not Rui, which I agree. I don't think you should trade him right now. I think Max Christie's pretty good. He's functional. It's like you have Gabe, you have Vando, you have Jalen Hood Shafino. That puts you in the 20s. You can get somebody in the 20s. Like they could actually get into Nikola Vucevic territory, but like basketball wise, I don't know if that's something I want to see.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
Like, but there are mechanics to sort of get that done. I want to touch on one or two more teams. The Knicks, because I do a Knicks show at New York Post YouTube channel. New York got game weekly. And on Thursday nights, we've talked a lot about Mitchell Robinson, of course, because it's just this constant battle of, do you wait for him to come back, ramp up, and give you sort of what you need in that backup center role as someone who could also play with Towns and play without him? Doesn't matter. Or do you try to go and get something done now? In the Knicks cap situation, like we've talked about, okay, if you do trade Mitchell Robinson, you have more flexibility to get things done. Be it can you pursue Jordan Clarkson, for example? Can you pursue like another creative or another creator rather who makes in that 13, 14, $15 million range? Or do you just keep them and go shopping with Precious Achua, which won't get you as much? I mentioned Corey Kispert, but the problem is Corey Kispert has an extension that will kill them beyond this season because he's going to make a lot more money than he's making right now. So, in terms of flexibility, given that the Knicks traded a lot of their draft capital already for Mikal Bridges, for example, they went all in on the Karl Anthony Towns deal. What do they have left to play with? And in order to get a real upgrade, do they have to? Do they absolutely have to trade Mitchell Robinson? Or could they get something done with, say, Precious Achua and the draft capital that they do have, being that I don't think they're going to trade a Deuce McBride, for example?
So I kind of find myself going back and forth on the Knicks situation because if they need something, I think it's a wing to come off the bench, help relieve a little bit of the load for Brunson, for Bridges, Hart, and OG.
Hmm.
But at the same time, their backup big situation is pretty delicate because right now their main big is Precious, and then he also dealt with some injuries earlier this year. Um, Tibbs, for the most part, doesn't. I think he tries not to. Ideally, doesn't want to play Sims or Hook 40. So if they're trading, So if they're going to trade Mitch, you need to get a pretty good wing that would make sense, someone they can keep, fits their cap sheet, but also he's exactly what they need right now. That's another thing, an element they need off their
Exactly.
bench. So it's hard to say what the Knicks are going to end up doing. I kind of get the feeling they might not do anything ahead of the trade deadline. Maybe do a trade to save some money and then be ready for whoever might be bought out. It's hard to tell because when I look at who the Knicks can potentially trade, like a wing the Knicks can actually trade to get, um, the options aren't that great. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just keep the roster for the most part.
And they kind of need, like I mentioned, Jordan Clarkson. We've talked about Malcolm Brogdon, someone like that. You need Mitchell Robinson to get that done, do you not? Or is there some sort of cap loophole that they could uncover, being that the front office actually has been pretty diligent as of late? But it seems like, just in terms of the mechanics of making a deal happen, it seems like they just need Mitchell Robinson in order to get somebody like that.
If they can combine, yeah, so they could trade Mitchell Robinson for someone making less than him. So if you're looking like a mid-level guy, that works. You could also try to combine him with Precious to bring someone making like 18 to 19 million, but then that really
Mm,
decimates your big man rotation. So
yeah.
unless you're getting another big man back, that's not really worth it. So uh, I would say if I don't know, it's hard to. Yeah, I would guess the most likely trade they do to bring in like a mid-level guy would be to trade Mitchell Robinson, especially if they're just convinced that his health isn't really going to get better this year.
Hmm.
But like I said, I think it's really tough just given how precarious their backup big situation is.
Yeah, we've talked about Jonas Valanciunas, for example, who is a guy you can probably go get. And Mitchell Robinson makes sense for Washington because Washington, if they get draft pick compensation, they're probably just okay with that. And they honestly they signed Jonas Valanciunas to trade him and get something back for him. Is that a deal that financially would help the Knicks, even though Jonas Valanciunas is on the books for a couple more years, or is that something that they should stay away from unless they just really, really like him as a player?
Personally, I wouldn't do that. I
Mm,
would just stick to Mitch. He's got the higher salary. The Knicks don't really need to decrease salary next and for the next few seasons. Like with the top five they have, they're okay with keeping uh, an additional 14 or so million-dollar player in Mitch. Um, I if I think I just would rather have Mitchell than Jonas. I think for what the Knicks are trying to do. I understand Jonas is much healthier, but I would just rather that. I think Mitchell, when fully healthy, is like much more impactful than Jonas.
The Heat, and we've been asked about Jimmy here. Sailor D asked a while ago. We talked about Jimmy already. We may talk about him again right now because we're about to get up out of here. Who are they trading Jimmy to? I mean, I guess Phoenix. I don't know. Last week I said, actually, let me bring this up to you, Yossi. Is there a way, or do you think there could be a team ballsy enough if they get the right compensation back? Could
Hmm.
could Miami find a team to trade Jimmy Butler to that could then just be like, all right, we'll just waive him? Like, is that a mechanic that that's another team would find viable for them, or is that just
If
like a little too out of left field?
well, if they're hoping to get off some long-term money and they just view Jimmy as an expiring, maybe, but he also does have that player option, so he's not really an expiring. Um, I think if you're trading for Jimmy Butler, you basically need to have him be on board based on how he's, how he's shown the ability to be disengaged and whenever he's not happy, because that's the main thing. Now, you can trade for a player who's under contract, but like with a star player, if he's not if he's not all in on the team, if he's not okay with the situation, then that could affect his performance
Mhm.
and that could affect the team. And a team can't go to court and say, "Hey, here's the play right here where he wasn't trying." Was like what as the Heat they accused Jimmy of in the game last month, which I'm sure they could make a compelling case, but there's just
Sure.
nothing in the CBA that allows you to do that. So if you're trading for Jimmy, I think you gotta hope he's gotta be on board with it. With any star player really for that matter, especially one that he he's his contract situation is really fluid right now. So, but I think he's mainly just looking for a place where he can get his next, maximize his earnings, which is pretty understandable. Um, there were some reports that he doesn't want to go to Memphis. The only reason I could imagine that would be is if they made it clear, hey, here's how much we want to give you. It's not max money.
Right.
Um,
That's what I think.
that's all I could imagine. Yeah, that would probably be the only reason. Otherwise, like, why wouldn't you want to play in
Right.
Memphis?
Right. I think Memphis is like the perfect place, but I get the sense they don't want to extend him. Also, they have to extend Jaron Jackson Jr. this summer. So I think that's a factor in that as well.
Well, I'm just curious what I'm sure they communicated to him what it is they'd resign him to. I'm just wondering like what is that where he like all the where they happen to be singled out from all the places he would supposedly be okay, not okay with going to. Um, so yeah, you like so I don't think like I said they got to trade him to. He's got to be okay with the destination for the most part.
Donut Dan, Shanghai Sharks. No, I don't think they're gonna do that. But I mean, have you seen the Chinese basketball league teams? I don't think they could afford the salary cap that Jimmy Butler would have. They got some bread though. I mean, they gave Kyle Fogg a couple million not that long ago. Look that name up. Ryan says they wouldn't waive him, but I do think someone will sit on him and flip him for a pick or two in the offseason when he opts in. I just don't see a contender trusting him at this point. What do you think of this scenario, Yossi, where like somebody, I don't know who this would be, but like someone just trades for him and then when he opts in just try to trade him again. I don't know if a team would stomach that necessarily, but I mean, is this a scenario you see as being possible?
As long as they don't lose value, if it's the type of situation where, okay, maybe you are a team like Memphis, you're okay with just renting him for this season and then things don't work out, he opts in, you can at least get that value back or hopefully at least made a deep playoff run. Okay, but it just seems like too many steps to deal with.
Okay, a couple more things and then I'll let you get out of here. One, speaking of the Heat, a lot of the talk has been 2026 free agency, and they want to preserve their cap space for that. Not from the standpoint of, hey, this is going to be like 2010 all over again, but 2026 free agency, is this a myth or is this a real thing? Like, could you see, given how the CBA is affecting teams and how caps are going, could you see like more Paul George situations where a team just lets a guy walk and then we actually do get good free agents that year? Or is this a myth where, like, hey, most of these guys are going to sign extensions and there's not going to be that many players available, or somewhere in the middle?
I think you just answered it because that's been the trend ever since COVID. Every team, every star player has been trying to get an extension because that year the salary cap froze. It stayed the same. So you were gonna, for the first time in a while, players were gonna make as much money extending to their max as hitting free agency and getting a max. So, and that it just hasn't changed since that. And now the new extension rules, you can get higher extensions. So now it makes it easier to maximize your money in extension than in the last CBA. So, and especially now that they opened up the trade rules for below apron teams, it seems like the new free agency, so to speak, is teams extending, and if they need to get moved, now it's much easier to trade these guys. Um, so yeah, I see some of the names that could potentially become free agents in 2026, but chances are most of those good names will sign extensions. I don't know. I would. I think eventually someday that pendulum will swing where we will get players trying to hit free agency again. I just I'm not sure it's going to be in 2026.
Yeah, because if you pull up the list, I mean, I'm not going to go through all the names, but like De'Aaron Fox is one of the big ones, for example. And he could get an extension, or he could get traded and sign an extension with the new team. Like, there are different mechanics to sort of get that done. But he's one. This isn't a huge one, but sneakily, like Ayo Dosunmu, who's actually become a pretty important player with the Bulls. You have Anthony Simons, Norman Powell, Mikal Bridges still needs to get his extension. Waiting on that one, see what that's going to look like. Kevin Durant, if he still wants to continue to play beyond year 19, will be out there. And Daniel Gafford, who's having a nice year as well. Kristaps Porzingis, Mitchell Robinson. Like, it's not a list where like you absolutely have to have all the books cleared, but I mean, it is an interesting list, and that's just the unrestricted free agency list. It's not even including, a Trey Young who could opt out of his deal, a Luka Doncic who could opt out of his deal, which those are probably like two of the big, big, big names. And then you have guys on team options, like, to a lesser extent, a Lou Dort, where, and an Isaiah Hartenstein, where, I mean, they could potentially be going somewhere else too. What's the biggest misconception overall of the new CBA? Like, the thing that people are super fearful of, but when you sort of read tea leaves and read into it, you're like, you shouldn't be this scared of this part of it.
Um, I think I kind of touched on it with the second apron stuff because I don't think teams are going to be quite as fearful as we initially thought. I guess though the biggest thing are which hasn't happened yet, are going to be the new tax rates because the bigger reason why a team like the Celtics might have to change things up is how much more expensive the team is going to be
Mm-hmm.
because they're going to have, if they keep the same roster rolling over into next season, they're going to have like a half a billion team, maybe close to like 600 million. And that's mainly because now they're going to be in the repeater tax. That's what happens when you're in the luxury tax for so many years. So they have higher rates, but then also they're increasing the rates starting next season for teams that are deep into the tax. So so now their multiplier per dollar is just going to skyrocket. And they also have a new owner coming in. We don't know what they're spending,
Nope,
how much
that's
they'll want to
important.
spend.
That's important.
Yeah, but that's I think we don't know where the lines are going to be yet because that's a lot of money. But on one hand, we've seen teams be willing to spend over 100 million. Now the Suns are spending like 200 million in tax. So as the cap's increasing, okay, we're starting to see the rate in which teams are willing to spend into the tax also going up.
Hmm.
So maybe there's going to be some type of world where, okay, there could be teams willing to spend like 250, 300 million into the tax, which would get them, the Celtics and Suns, to that $500 million roster type number when you combine with their payroll. So that, I think more so that, just because we haven't seen it yet, we've yet to see how those increased tax rates are gonna affect team building, because that could force a team to, alter their window a little earlier than they hoped.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that right after they won the title, Wick was like, "All right, we're selling the team. We're getting ready to find new buyers for the Celtics." After looking at their cap sheet, it's like, "Oh, this team's going to be hard to keep together." And I think they got their title, and they probably don't want to deal with those problems. Maurice Shaw sort of teased me up for what I wanted to end with because I failed to mention Zion Williamson earlier. Earlier, might as well hit New Orleans. Maurice Shaw, how long is Brandon Ingram supposed to be out if a team trades for him? When will he be able to play? What does New Orleans' situation look like? I've thought about maybe them potentially getting in on the five-teamer that we outlined earlier with Jimmy Butler, with the Suns, with the Heat, with the was it the Pistons that you said would have to probably be involved? What would this potentially look like? And should should the Pelicans want to even trade Brandon Ingram? Yes, I guess, but should they even want to trade Zion Williamson, for example? I feel like his contract has enough outs where you don't absolutely have to get rid of him at this point. But I think New Orleans is going to shake something up because of the way their season's gone.
I think as far as Ingram, so I'll start with that.
Yeah.
When the Jimmy Butler rumor started, that was like the first type of hypothetical trade I put together is, okay, what if the Heat want Brandon Ingram, which is one of the better available all stars they can get? I don't,
Yes.
but how do they feel about him? He's obviously injured. People just kind of forgotten about that uh, he's even potentially available. Yeah, I don't know if the Heat want him because that would impact their 2026 plan, so maybe not. Um, but as far as what the Pelicans should do now, I don't think they need to do anything at the moment with the Ingram situation. I wouldn't be worried about losing him for nothing because there's just no teams with cap space. No competitive teams with cap space. Like the only teams that might have cap space this summer are the Nets and Wizards, and I don't see either of those teams going after Brandon Ingram. So if I don't see him getting a huge offer. So maybe he'll even want to sign some type of extension and avoid free agency. Might not be max money that pays him 50 million a year, but what if he can get like 40 something million a year? So they get him on something a little more favorable, or maybe they sign and trade him later on something similar. So I think the Pelicans are in a fine spot not to trade him. I don't think they're gonna get, they're gonna regret it later.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other thing is with their, so then as far as Zion, I think the bigger issue is like what's the payroll situation next year. So if they, let's say they do end up bringing Ingram, then they'll be in the tax again, and then they'll have to try to get below it later. I think they'd be more likely to try to do something with McCollum, who'll be expiring. If they can trade him for someone cheaper, like just hypothetically, let's say they do something where maybe it was like, and not like a two-team trade with the Heat, because I don't think the Heat would do this, but let's say there's like a three-teamer type thing where the Pelicans send out McCollum elsewhere, and they take in Terry Rozier, who hasn't been good this year, but he makes like $9 million
Heat
less.
fans would go
So you
crazy if
just
this happened.
so both players expire the same year, but you're just lowering his salary so you can help get a little closer to your tax goals.
Mm.
So I think they're really just going to be trying to make sure their cap sheet is, they're not too expensive next year, in which case there's not really much urgency to move Zion. They're going to get a high pick, which is also going to bump up their payroll a little bit. But I think unless they're getting like, I want to say multiple first round picks of value, which they're probably not getting for Zion, I don't see why they really need to move him right now, especially since they have no strings attached to his contract. They'll be able to waive him Well, they have an early guaranteed date in the offseason. I think it's like July something. But I I don't see any teams giving up a whole lot of stuff for him. And then in that case, I just don't see why. I think the Pelicans just keep trying it again because I mean, and I understand that they were pretty good last. They've been like solid, as in like making the 8 seed, and when they're fully healthy, they could be a little better than that. They just haven't been. So I don't think they're gonna rebuild. I think they'll try to run it back, try to get someone that fits better than Ingram. And if they fail again next year, if they're just like outright bad next year and they're mostly healthy, okay, that might raise some really tough decisions.
You got me thinking, what if in this 5 team deal that New Orleans is able to get off of McCollum, but also Ingram ends up going to the Heat? Rozier is involved, so it's not just Jimmy. Like there's just a lot of things that can happen. This is why I want to I want them to get this done so I can see what this looks like and I could see obviously your breakdown. Last thing here, we'll end with Ryan's comment: an expansion draft and 10% cap increases should soften the blow a bit. I wonder if teams' desire to get off money will provoke the owners to do a 4 team expansion instead of 2. I'm not sure if this is going to be the case. There's going to be 2, but I mean, I will throw this at you. I mean, I know I don't think you cover a ton of expansion, but I mean, this is still an interesting observation to me because we've heard a lot about the return of Seattle, the introduction of Vegas. I'm someone who hopes that the NBA would seriously take Mexico City as a potential market for a team. And I'm not just saying that because you're part Mexican, as I learned right before we started this. But I mean, how much is expansion sort of looming over all of this? Is I guess my question. Like expansion with the CBA, upcoming free agency, the tax rates that you just outlined. Like how much does expansion have an impact on all of this, if any?
I don't know. The second part of this question, I can't answer to. I don't know if they can just decide, hey, let's add 2 extra teams just because. But when they do expansion, so something that isn't, you know, I don't think is really that well known about expansion is that teams can make trades with the expansion teams where, okay, don't take any of our uh, let's say you're a team like the Rockets, and I bring up the Rockets because they have a lot of players. Usually, I think when you do an expansion draft, you could only protect 7 or 8 players.
Hmm.
They have more than that. They like someone good would probably get picked up. So teams can negotiate with the expansion teams and say, hey, how about you don't take any of our players, anyone on our roster, we'll give you like a draft pick instead, and then maybe you take one of our bad salaries instead. You can do that type of trade with expansion teams. I don't know how common that was, like that strategy back in 20 years ago. Oh God, my
2004.
alarm's going off. I don't know how much teams did it, like when the Bobcats expanded or when the Raptors Wolves expanded in the 90s.
Sure.
But I do feel like now that's if you're entering the league, you have nothing. That's what you're going to want to do. Just maximize, just get as many assets as possible, and take on bad money, help the rest of the league out. So I think I would imagine that's how expansion goes because like you're not going to get a good player through an expansion draft. Most likely, they're all going to be protected. So that in a way could bail out the league, so to speak, where that's interesting to think about. What if there are teams once they know when expansion is coming? Maybe it's like what 3 years from now. Maybe
Hmm.
this offseason or next offseason they sign someone to a ridiculous contract, thinking, oh, we'll be able to get off of it in expansion later. We'll do something if needed. Who knows?
Uptown Sports TV says great convo, appreciate it. Also says Pat Riley has nasty skeletons in his closet. Hector DM me also. That's Yossi Gozlan, Substack, YouTube, capsheets.com, thirdapron.com, Twitter, Blue Sky. Did I miss anything?
I think that's everything. Thank you.
Go to his channel for more cap expertise. He will have breakdowns of trades and things of that nature. And if you tuned into this channel for the first time, thank you. We're building it. We're doing a lot here, and it's growing. So appreciate the support, and we will have more to come very, very soon, including a boxing film breakdown. David Benavidez, David Morrell. That is coming up. That's going to be out tomorrow at the time I'm recording this. Take it easy with